Hare Krishna and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, dear devotees. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Many Moons podcast. This is our 15th episode, and tonight, or this morning, or this afternoon, we have Kalakantha Prabhu joining us. And we're going to discuss a topic which we know at the moment is very topical, and that is the topic of Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus. So we've entitled this talk, All My Spiritual Sons and Daughters, and we're specifically looking into why we think Srila Prabhupada did want Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus. Now, for those of us that might not have met Kalakantha Prabhu, he is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada who's been mainly based in the USA, where for many years he has been involved in outreach, particularly to the youth. He was one of the founders of the Krishna House Project, which has been immensely successful in attracting diverse young people to Krishna consciousness. If I'm correct, they started with the Krishna House Project in Gainesville, but from there, it has been established in several other places in the United States and even in other countries, as in Africa, where it has continuously been successful. Kalakantha Prabhu has also been involved in the campaign to have the GBC accept Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus, I think, for several years, and he is at the forefront for helping Vaishnavis to gain a voice. So thank you so much, Kalakantha Prabhu, for being with us today. We are very grateful for you giving us your valuable time.
My pleasure. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, getting straight into the conversation, Prabhu, we know that Srila Prabhupada did not instate any Vaishnavis to act as Diksha Gurus. So can we say that this is proof that he did not approve of Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus in principle?
You know, in the very chaotic time passing after Srila Prabhupada's departure, there was a lot of confusion about this question. In fact, my dear friend Tamal Krishna Maharaj explained, subsequent to Prabhupada's departure, that Prabhupada never appointed any gurus. He just indicated a few senior disciples to act on his behalf while he was too ill to perform the initiations himself. Afterwards, that was up to the GBC. So the idea that Prabhupada appointed gurus is incorrect. He wanted all of his disciples to be gurus. I was present in 1975 when he made this public statement in Mayapur that each of you, he essentially asked us to initiate 10 disciples each and then work up to 10 million acharyas, and there would be no scarcity. And after saying that, expressing that vision, he went into a state of ecstasy, one of his few public displays of ecstasy. So that understanding was a big mistake after Prabhupada's departure, that initiations were to be limited to a few. So the basic teaching of Krishna consciousness is we're not this body. And if we say, well, he didn't appoint any women gurus, well, he didn't appoint any Indian gurus, black gurus, Hispanic gurus. It's silly to evaluate based on the body. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that this is an aparad to the Vaishnava, to judge them based on their birth. Elsewhere in the Shastra, it's also said this is an indication of jati buddhi, an hellish intelligence, to think of a devotee based on their body. So this argument doesn't hold any water. Well, Prabhupada did not appoint any women gurus. He didn't appoint any gurus at all. And just one more demographic point, if I might add. In those days, in 1977, Srila Prabhupada's very senior disciples were maybe in their early 30s. So all of his 1,500 female disciples were in their childbearing and rearing years. It was not a time where they could give of themselves to taking care of others as readily as men. But now, 45 years on, things are much different.
Okay, so Prabhu, you mentioned that Prabhupada did not actually instate any gurus, but we know that he did appoint the GBC. Is that correct? He did
Yes.
appoint anybody's. So are we correct in saying that when he appointed the GBC, there was no women included, and can't we then refer that Prabhupada, for that reason, did not want any women in any leadership position whatsoever?
No, because again, the women were primarily in their childbearing and child-rearing years. Even at that, Prabhupada did have women as temple presidents in London, Jamuna. He also offered a seat on the GBC to Jamuna, but she felt that the men would be too uncomfortable, so she declined. So the main thing is that Prabhupada saw his female disciples as equal to his men as far as preaching is concerned. And that is a tremendous loss for our movement in the subsequent years, that women have been given insufficient voice since Prabhupada's departure. May I just share a quote from Srila Prabhupada here on this point, if I may?
Yes, please do, Prabhupada.
All right, I'll just put it up on the screen quickly. This is Srila Prabhupada at a Vyas Puja offering, or Vyas Puja lecture in 1973, where he's saying, my dear sons and daughters, you'll have to become spiritual master. You, all my disciples, everyone should become spiritual master. I hope that all of you, men, women, boys, and girls, become spiritual master. Now, could we be more explicit than that?
Thank you for sharing that, Prabhu. Now, we can argue that Prabhupada did say that, but he actually meant that he only wanted his Vaishnavi disciples to be shikshakers, because we have this very well-known purport from Srimad Bhagavatam from the 4th canto, 12th chapter, text number 32, and we are looking at the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj, and we know that Dhruva Maharaj went to the forest and he went to meditate and he had a darshan of Narayan. And then after this, Srila Prabhupada writes, Dhruva had a feeling of obligation to his mother Suniti. It was Suniti who had given him the clue which had now enabled him to be personally carried to the Vaikuntha planet by the associate of Lord Vishnu. He now remembered her and wanted to take her with him. Actually, Dhruva Maharaj's mother Suniti was his Patha Pradaksha Guru. And then he goes on later, although Narada Muni was his Diksha Guru, Suniti, his mother, was the first who gave him instruction on how to achieve the favor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the duty of the Shiksha Guru or the Diksha Guru to instruct the disciples in the right way, and it depends on the disciple to execute the process. According to Shastric injunctions, there is no difference between Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru, and generally the Shiksha Guru later becomes the Diksha Guru. Suniti, however, being a woman, and specifically his mother, could not become Dhruva Maharaj's Diksha Guru. Still, he was not less obliged to Suniti. So, doesn't this prove that Prabhupada approved of ladies taking the position of Shiksha Guru, but definitely not as Diksha Guru?
Yes, this is clear from this purport that in those days, at that time, women were not allowed to, or did not practice initiating. Certainly anyone can read that from this quote. Suniti did not initiate, and if there was a Shudra present, whom Dhruva was inspired by, he would not have been initiating either. But the practice of taking a quote like that and then extrapolating that it applies to our circumstances today, to our movement today, this is called screwing an obscure meaning out of a text. It's a logical fallacy. I'd like to give you, if I may, another example that is frequently quoted by those who oppose Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus. This is from the Krishna book. And here we see this quote. The Brahmins said, according to Vedic injunction, women are not allowed to undergo the purificatory process of initiation by the sacred thread, nor are they allowed to live as brahmacharinis in the ashram of the spiritual master, nor are they advised to undergo the strict disciplinary procedures, nor are they very expert in discussing the philosophy of self-realization, and by nature they are not very pure, nor are they very much attached to auspicious activities. Pretty strong. Then the speech continues. Therefore, how wonderful it is that these women have developed transcendental love for Krishna, the Lord of all mystic yogis. They have surpassed all of us in firm faith and devotion unto Krishna. Although we are considered to be masters in all purificatory processes, we did not actually know what the goal is, because we are too much attached to the materialistic way of life. So here's a classic example. You take part of it, but not the whole quote, and it may be construed to present one thing. I do want to mention, of course, Srila Prabhupada, in spite of this Vedic injunction right there in the Krishna book, Prabhupada opened brahmacharini ashrams. Prabhupada gave the Gayatri mantra to women, and Prabhupada engaged his women disciples in all kinds of outreach activities, such as book distribution and lecturing in public, and all of these sort of activities. So if we take this quote from Suniti and say, therefore, Prabhupada did not want female Diksha Gurus, even though he specifically said he did, then we're trying to work around rather than observing the quote directly from the spiritual master. And as it says in the Shastra, Yasya Devi Para Bhaktir Yata Devi Tatagaro. You cannot understand the scripture except through the mercy of the spiritual master.
Thank you, Prabhupada. I have two objections. The one being that the times when Prabhupada said that I want all my spiritual sons and daughters to initiate, he would usually include both categories. He would say sons and daughters. And for the exception of that interview with the professor, there's not a specific time where Prabhupada said, like, I want, my female disciples to initiate in the future. So isn't that proof that Prabhupada was potentially, in his speaking, just trying to be inclusive to make the women feel accepted, given their cultural background, but he did not actually intend that they should take up that position socially to become Diksha Gurus?
This is a very dangerous chain of thought. Well, Prabhupada said this, but he meant that. Where does it stop? Where does it stop? There's a scriptural injunction, for example, that a man should not hear a woman singing. And so one brahmachari wrote to Srila Prabhupada, we're listening to this tape of the Govindam prayers in the morning. There's a woman singing. We'd rather hear a tape of your divine grace chanting the Govindam prayers. And Prabhupada wrote back, no, you have made a very new discovery. This injunction doesn't apply, and we're listening to it here. You can listen to it there. Later, this devotee left Krishna Consciousness. There's another example, if you're interested in the Varnashram argument on this point. Prabhupada once was asked by a disciple, this democracy, Prabhupada was saying that democracy is the best option in Kali Yuga. And Prabhupada's disciple said, well, Prabhupada, you wrote in the book that democracy is inferior. And Prabhupada said, yes, but it's the best option today because there are no qualified leaders. So if we start second-guessing Prabhupada's direct statements, we are running the risk of minimizing his importance as the founder Acharya of ISKCON.
Then, Prabhu, even if we accept that potentially Prabhupada did make those statements that his daughters, his spiritual daughters, could initiate, we still see in that particular pastime we were referencing the wives of the Yagrik Brahmanas, we see that it is acknowledged that the wives had surpassed the husbands in their devotion. But we don't see that the wives change their social position afterwards. We don't see the wives, performing the yagya. We don't see the wives, becoming, active brahmanas themselves. So, aren't we saying that maybe women are, equally have equal opportunity to grow in devotional service, but that does not mean that they've got equal opportunity when it comes to social roles as being a guru?
Well, this is a reason why we need Srila Prabhupada's guidance, Shardiya, so much, because he was doing something unprecedented. Even to cross the ocean for a sannyasi was against Vedic injunctions, but he went. And when he came, he implemented practical strategies that were successful for spreading Krishna consciousness. Here's an example from Srila Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita. Oh, no, actually, this is a letter, excuse me. Okay. This is a whole new thing in the history of the Sankirtan movement. I'm especially proud of how my householder disciples are preaching Lord Chaitanya's mission. This is a new thing in the history of the Sankirtan movement. In India, all the acharyas and their descendants later on acted only from the man's side. Their wives were at home because that is the system from old times, that women are not required to go out. But in Bhagavad Gita, we find that women are also equally competent like the men in the matter of Krishna consciousness movement. Please, therefore, carry on these missionary activities and prove it by practical example that there is no bar for anyone in the matter of preaching work for Krishna consciousness. So these are new social roles for a new set of circumstances, an unprecedented set of circumstances Srila Prabhupada was encountering. As the founder Acharya, he showed us what is the actual application of the Shastra in this time, place, and circumstance.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was really the one thing I wanted to pick up on, because this is something that I've come across time and time again. Time again, we spoke about the Brahmins' wives being more sort of evolved in in the Shastras, but they actually didn't perform that role. Another thing that I've heard time and time again is, although Prabhupada did give second initiation to his female disciples, nobody got the thread. So therefore, that's the sort of Vedic, so almost the representation of that guru or being Brahminical. So although he gave it, that symbolic representation wasn't given. Therefore, that kind of is seen as his desire for ladies to not be performing that active role, like in the case of the wives of the Brahmanas. So what's this? Is this idea about, is it Vedic, is it Vaishnava? I mean, I'm sure we could talk about it all day long, but I'd like you to clarify that point. Why Prabhupada, if he said that you've said, Prabhupada had the same desires, same aspirations for his female disciples, why did he not give the thread to the female disciples?
Srila Prabhupada described the millions of men in India who wear sacred threads but are not Vaishnavas as 2 paisa Brahmins. That's the cost of a Brahmin thread, 2 paisa. And he did not consider them authentic Brahmins in spite of them wearing a thread. On the other hand, my god sister Saradiya was in South America with her husband, pioneering. She had second initiation, Gayatri mantra from Srila Prabhupada. Her husband did not. Prabhupada wrote and said, you can give the mantra to your husband. So he did not see that as any restriction. The fact that for physical reasons or whatever reasons, the women did not wear threads. They had the Gayatri mantra. They chanted the Gayatri mantra. He gave them the full mantra. He did not hold back any part of it. And he expected them to act as Brahmins. It's interesting, like today in ISKCON India, women are not allowed to do deity worship. But in Srila Prabhupada's time, it was the ladies who he instructed on how to do the deity worship, and then they instructed the men. Janani Vasprabhu and others were instructed by Prabhupada's women disciples on deity worship. So for cultural reasons, people may not take ISKCON seriously because of their biases. If they see women doing deity worship in parts of the world, certainly not the case in other parts of the world. And it certainly was not in Prabhupada's mind that he was somehow shortchanging his women disciples by not giving them a thread.
I mean, there's also the famous, very infamous incident, isn't there? Prabhupada was giving a lecture and the microphone was falling off, and he just asked one of them to take up the Brahmin thread and tied the microphone. I'm sure you're familiar with the story. I think, it kind of also begs that question: how much significance should one give to these kind of physical attributes of things, doesn't it?
Yes, was yes. So let's move on. What's next?
Yeah. So, in terms of something else I wanted to pick up was some. Do you think that Srila Prabhupada's ideas? I know he's comes from a very traditional background, but do you think that his ideas about women and particularly their social position and abilities changed after he had spent some time in the West?
Absolutely, yes. Srila Prabhupada saw so many differences, and therefore he incorporated the adjustments. He considered that one of his most creative applications of time, place, and circumstance preaching in spreading Krishna consciousness. For example, we mentioned the Brahmacharini ashrams. In 1968, he instructed all of the temples to open ashrams for women. This is unheard of in India, except in very cloistered women-only situations. But he saw what was effective and working in the West. And so he saw many different social roles. For example, again, we mentioned earlier, book distribution. What could be less Vedic for a woman to go out in public and approach strangers and try to sell them books? That Prabhupada talked about his mother only going out when she was carried in a palanquin. She would not be exposed in the public at all. But he wanted his ladies to go out and do the Sankirtan, and they did better than the men in most cases. One of my god sisters, Mula Prakriti, asked Srila Prabhupada about this contradiction. We're supposed to be chaste, we're supposed to be humble, and yet to go out and sell books, we have to be very aggressive. Srila Prabhupada said, yes, you be a lion on the prowl and a lamb at home. And of course, this applies to men also. It's not that men have the right to be arrogant and pushy at home. One of my godbrothers asked Srila Prabhupada, what does it mean to be humble? And Prabhupada answered like a lion. He said, to be bold for Krishna. My godbrother said he blew him against the wall. He was so strong. So he saw the potential that the ladies had in reaching new people with Krishna consciousness. And he described the women as the secret weapon in spreading Krishna consciousness. There's a nice quote here, if I may, I'll just share with you from the Chaitanya Charitamrita in this regard. He writes, not knowing that boys and girls in countries like Europe and America mix very freely, fools and rascals criticize the boys and girls in Krishna consciousness for intermingling. But these rascals should consider that one cannot suddenly change a community's social customs. However, since both the boys and girls are being trained to become preachers, these girls are not ordinary girls, but are as good as their brothers who are preaching Krishna consciousness. So we can understand that Prabhupada made multiple statements in this regard, that the men and women in Krishna consciousness should be gurus, they should be leaders, they should preach. Then Prabhupada made many statements in his books that women are less intelligent, women are more sentimental, women should be in restricted social roles. And then he made these statements, which said that women who take up Krishna consciousness are not ordinary women. So if we drop the first and third department of statements and just focus on the statements about women being less intelligent, etc., we are taking, again, out of context, something from the spiritual master and trying to present that as his words without giving the whole picture.
Thank you, Prabhupada. That was really helpful to put into context, how perhaps Srila Prabhupada really sort of lived that, time, place, circumstance, sort of how you apply the Shastras. But another thing that we hear time and time again is that, these people who advocate, Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus, are trying to use this idea of the exact point about time, place, circumstance, taking it to the next extent. Things will always change. So does that mean we have to keep changing? If at some point we say, oh, certain part of the world doesn't like the idea of gurus, they think it's too much subordination, so should we just get rid of, should we just get rid of gurus? So where does this change of application to time and place, where should it stop? Therefore, Srila Prabhupada never instated via Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus we shouldn't have it, because we will be forever, pardon my French, bastardizing the Shastras and the systems, is one of the key arguments I've seen, really.
Yes. In other words, we're just always adjusting our message to accommodate changing fads and social situations. Right. This is another specious argument, because there are some basic foundational adjustments that Prabhupada made, and that needn't change. His basic requirement for initiation, chanting 16 rounds, following the 4 regulator principles, his reliance on Rupa Goswami and the nectar of devotion, that having a spiritual master is one of the 5 most important practices of Krishna consciousness. These are inviolable principles. You can't change them and still have Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada demonstrated that the details, such as gender roles in different parts of the world, could easily be adjusted without affecting the principles. It's when we elevate a detail to the level of a principle that the conflicts start in our Sangha.
No, that was very helpful. Another thing that we hear is, are Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus part of our Gaudiya Vaishnavism? Is this part of our Sampradaya? I know there are a few Nityananda line and others that are, that have female Goswaminis and are actually practicing to this instead refute this idea. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't have active out there female sannyasin, so therefore what is this idea of female diksha gurus? It's just a western woke concept. So can you just put into context the history of Vaishnavi diksha gurus within our Gaudiya Vaishnavism sampradaya, really?
Yes, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Kiba vipra kivanyasi se guru hoy. If one knows the science of Krishna, one can be a guru. It didn't matter what was one's designation. So let's not conflate these two things. Prabhupada was specific that women should not take sannyas, and women are not applying to take sannyas. There's a great deal of misunderstanding in our Sangha, thinking that guru means sannyas. 90% of our gurus are sannyasis, But according to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that is not a restriction. If we look, though, at the history of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, there were many Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus. I'm not a scholar in this area, but I've consulted with scholars. Rupa Chandra Prabhu, who teaches history of religions at Manhattan College in New York, he studied Gaudiya Vaishnava history thoroughly. He says, oh yes, there were many, many gurus amongst the female gurus among the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Many of the wives of the Panchatattva, for example, had disciples. And the main thing he noted in his study was that nobody thought much of it. It was just not a big deal. Chadaratma Prabhu, my godbrother, who's also done extensive study and does presentations on the lives of Vaishnavacharyas, he says the same thing. Oh yes, if you read the histories, there were so many. It was a commonplace affair that women would also initiate those who approached them for shelter. Again, going back to this point, the Shiksha and Diksha are, according to Shastra, the same. You can't say, you can give Shiksha, but you can't give Diksha. But let's get a little more contemporary. Amongst the followers of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in the Gaudiya Math, there are female Diksha Gurus. One is in Puri, one lady named Urmila. Her husband gave his blessings that she could initiate. She has been the acharya of many, at least a couple of maths, has many, many disciples. There is another Gaudiya Math lady who is initiating, who has many disciples. She started to initiate in the West because she's so popular. And the Narayan Maharaj followers, Jadharani, my god sister, is now initiating disciples. I mean, ISKCON is missing the boat. We're doing the preaching and other people are coming in and taking the results of our preaching because of our reluctance to let women take this role.
You made a very important point, Prabhu, around the difference between the Shiksha and the distinction. So Vaishnava Siddhanta essentially states that we shouldn't differentiate between Shiksha and Diksha Gurus, and Vaishnavis are already acting as Shiksha Gurus. So people would say, why is there need? So is there a need? If there's no difference, what difference does it make? Because they're acting as gurus anyway.
Let's read what Srila Prabhupada has to say about this question. He is very explicit about this in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sometimes a caste guru says that Ye Krishna Tattva Veda Se Guru Hoy means that one who is not a Brahmin may become a Siksha Guru or a Vartma Pradakshika Guru, but not an initiator guru. According to such caste gurus, birth and family ties are considered foremost. However, the hereditary consideration is not acceptable to Vaishnavas. The word guru is equally applicable to the Vartma Pradakshika Guru, Siksha Guru, and Diksha Guru. And here's the important point. Please note this. Unless we accept the principle enunciated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this Krishna consciousness movement cannot spread all over the world. So by making this differentiation, oh yes, women can give Shiksha, but they can't give Diksha, we are inhibiting the growth of the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. It's at times like this, I miss Prabhupada's presence so much because I know in 1 second he would put this silly argument to rest. If people are capable of giving Shiksha, they're capable of giving Diksha. If I may add to that, the qualities of the Diksha Guru, really, to do it well, it means you need to be compassionate, you need to be patient, you need to be accessible, you need to be understanding and encouraging, nurturing. These are qualities that women have very deeply, especially women who have raised children, who have nurtured them through their childhood, teen years. And now we're talking about women who are grandmothers, highly experienced, very endowed with the qualities that are required, that disciples are looking for in their gurus.
Thank you, Prabhu. Shraddha, I think Shraddha wants to come in to take the conversation to a different direction, but yeah, you're on mute.
First, I have a challenge, Babu. We know that the fastest growing religion in the world at the moment is Islam. And if we look at the culture of Islam, we see that Islam is very conservative. And Islam definitely has very limited social roles for women and definitely does not allow women in leadership, whether that's managerial or spiritual. So does your argument that we need to be more liberal to have Krishna consciousness spreading anyways, does it really hold water if, Islam is spreading like wildfire all over the world?
Mm-hmm. So there's many divisions of Islam. First of all, you can't paint with such a broad brush that all Islam or Muslims follow the same social practices. The largest Muslim population in the world is in Indonesia, where such standards are much more liberal and much more relaxed than, say, in the Middle East. So let's not paint with a broad brush. We can also know that in Iran these days, the women are rebelling against this kind of social pressure and requirements for conservatism that are not necessarily comfortable or natural for them. So that said, we're talking about, from my point of view, I've preached in North America for the last 50 years, so I have to speak from my perspective. And I know here that when people are approached with the idea of being part of a religious organization, they're immediately turned off. The fastest growing designation for religious belief in this part of the world is spiritual, but not religious. There's a lot of mistrust of organizations to begin with. And then, especially educated people delve into ISKCON a little bit and see that men and women do not have equivalent spiritual opportunities. They also think of Islam. They think of the Taliban. They think of, well, here's this repressive organization that's backwards and repressing women. Now, this part of the world has different social circumstances. I understand why my brothers in India may take a different point of view, maybe other parts of the world. I don't preach there. I don't know, but I know here. In America, for example, 1 out of 4 children are raised in a family with a single parent, the vast majority of whom are mothers. So nearly everyone that we approach has either been raised in a single family parent or knows somebody who has, a friend or relative. And those single mothers, just consider their dilemma. They have to be the nurturing parent and they have to be the breadwinner. They're like superwomen. If they are able to do it successfully, it's an incredible amount of pressure. And it's so common in this part of the world that no less a figure than Ronald Reagan, the conservative icon, in 1980, announced a national holiday recognizing Single Parent Day. So the ratio of single mothers in America is 5 times greater than India. So naturally, devotees in India who have no experience with these things look at American needs and say, oh, well, this is not Vedic, this is not conservative, etc., etc. We need to stick to the tradition. This was Prabhupada's greatness, that he was able to make adjustments that worked. Palena parachiyate. He writes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that those who criticized him could not do anything for spreading Krishna consciousness. But he was very successful because he adapted to the present environment. So, yeah, the idea of conservative social roles in Islam, when presented in this part of the world, would be a great way to turn people against Krishna consciousness.
But Prabhu, we have to acknowledge you could also see it from a completely different perspective. We could argue that the fact that there's so many single mothers in the United States is proof of how degraded the culture is. And the question is, do we really want people that are so degraded that they cannot accept a transcendental system of varnashram, which gives subservient roles to women? Like, do we want that quality of people? Like low quality people who cannot accept authority, that cannot accept tradition. Do we really want them? Are they really like the people that Prabhupada would have wanted? We have to ask ourselves.
Yes. As someone who received this mercy of Srila Prabhupada in coming and preaching to very fallen and unqualified people, I have to answer your question like, yes, we do. We want people who are interested in bhakti yoga. We want people who are interested in Vaishnavism, who may come from any walk of life. This objection, it's so prevalent in our history. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, people objected to him being open to those of non-Brahminical backgrounds, taking up Krishna consciousness. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was threatened. His life was threatened by those whose livelihoods depended upon their unique position as being born in Brahmin families, and who felt threatened by him allowing those from non-Brahmin families to enter into Vaishnavism and Brahminical practices. So we're getting the same thing today. It's exactly the same mood that Srila Prabhupada threw aside under the order of his guru to make Krishna consciousness accessible to this very fallen part of the world. That is his greatness, hardly his disqualification. So are we saying that, well, Prabhupada came to the West, he preached to these Malechas and Yavanas, he gave us his pranam prayer, Paschatya Deshatarane, who delivering the Western countries, but now we're more advanced. We don't have to bother with these things anymore. And the Western countries, the degraded people, we cannot bother with them because we might get contaminated by their culture. You see? And Prabhupada was fearless. He was not afraid of that. And he proved that you could reach into the depths of degraded societies and pull out sincere soul seeking Krishna. He said there's a Brahman on every street corner. So are we supposed to lose that mood of our spiritual master now? Are we supposed to abandon the mission of our founder Acharya in the name of Vedic principles? I don't think so.
Thank you, Prabhu. We want to move on to the GBC's role in allowing Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus. Now, you just mentioned that Prabhupada wanted to reach out to everyone, and no matter how degraded or fallen a person was, if there was any interest in Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada wanted them to come. We can, however, say that although Prabhupada accepted everyone, regardless of their position, he had expectations that once people were in the society, they would gradually elevate themselves. And the GBC has that role for setting standards to ensure that everyone is gradually being elevated. So related to that, does the current ISKCON requirements for a devotee to act as a Diksha Guru prohibit Vaishnavis from giving initiation? If we look at the specific requirements, what does it mean to be a Diksha Guru? What are the qualifications? Are women per definition excluded?
Well, let me give a little brief history. In the late 1990s, it became evident that children in ISKCON were being abused. And the GBC took many steps to correct that abuse. Shortly after that, in 2000, leading women in ISKCON came forward and saying, we're being mistreated also. And the GBC issued a formal apology. and made arrangements that women would get equal access for worship and other opportunities in our Sangha. So shortly after that, a woman applied to initiate disciples. This was a woman who'd been preaching for many years, who had many aspiring disciples. And so the GBC commissioned a Shastric advisory group to study the question. So this group of neutral, erudite, experienced devotees came back with, after studying the history and studying Prabhupada's words and studying the philosophy, came back and said, yes, women can initiate. So there were objections. And long story short, they later commissioned another study by a Shastric advisory group who came back with precisely the same conclusions. So they said, yes, women can initiate. They put certain restrictions on women that did not apply to men. For example, women had to be 55 years old or more. They had to have blessings from their elder son or husband or a male protector. But otherwise, the conditions were the same for men and women. And that was passed in about 3 years ago. And those who opposed have been doing everything in their power to delay. And meanwhile, there are many nice devotees, mostly women, who want to be initiated by women gurus. And in many cases, these women feel a lack of trust in men due to traumas in their life. And they are very highly qualified, sometimes very highly educated professional women who are just waiting for the opportunity to choose the guru of their choice. So the qualifications, Shardiya Prabhu, they're no different for men and women other than those two stipulations.
Thank you for clarifying that, Prabhu. Can we, however, say that if we look at the example, which is most often cited, in favor of Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus, that is the wife of Lord Nityananda, Janava Devi, can we say that she could be a Diksha Guru and she, met the criteria of a Diksha Guru because she is a Mahabhagavat, she is an eternal soul, and clearly, the average woman doesn't fall in that category. And therefore, women actually need, a secondary set of qualifying principles as being a Maghabhavat, as being a Nityasiddha. Can't we say that?
Very selective application, right, of what is the requirement for a guru. In the case of Janava Mata, she one time manifested 4 arms in her divine ecstasies. And in one lecture, Srila Prabhupada described the role of a guru. He says, guru does not have to manifest 4 arms or 8 heads. Guru means one who has understood the teachings of his or her guru and is presenting them accurately and sincerely and applying them in his own life. Prabhupada said that this is the meaning of acharya, actually, one who knows the philosophy, applies the philosophy, and teaches the philosophy. So many women, so many wonderful Vaishnavis in our Sangha practice or know, apply, and practice. Some of the leading scholars in our movement who have the highest degrees that we're offering, the Bhakti Sarvabhauma, or Bhakti Vedanta, Bhakti Vaibhava, many of those highly educated individuals are in women's bodies. And they, in fact, are some of the main teachers of these advanced courses. So there's no question of women not knowing the philosophy. And practicing the philosophy, very painful for me to see my dear, sincere God sisters who've been practicing Krishna consciousness for 50 years or more, enduring all kinds of maltreatment or disrespect from the male leadership, and persisting nonetheless, now being told, well, we don't care if you have so many people who want to take initiation from you, you're a woman and you can't. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. And what are these young, educated women supposed to think? They see, here's an example of someone who's given their whole life to Srila Prabhupada, and yet they are not allowed to preach in the way in which they're qualified. They meet the qualifications, but just because of their gender, they're being denied. So, Prabhupada wanted this quote. Prabhupada wanted all of his disciples, as that quote I showed earlier, men and women. He I again feel all of the fallout from the zonal acharya fiasco, that being a Diksha Guru was this big, massive role. Anyone could be Shiksha, but being a Diksha Guru, you got to have all kinds of special qualifications. Srila Prabhupada, in many places in his books, refutes this point. In the Nectar of Instruction, for example, he says that sometimes in a classroom, a professor will appoint a younger student to monitor others, and that student acts as the teacher for that group. So there's such a thing as a monitor guru who is just acting on behalf of a more advanced guru. Who's going to tell the difference? How are we going to tell who's a Madhyama guru and who's an Uttama guru? There's no way to tell that. There are symptoms, but those symptoms, Prabhupada describes also in the Nectar of Instruction. Sometimes a person knows a philosophy and practices it and is enthusiastic to share it. That person should be considered an Uttama Adhikari. So this is, again, a very superficial argument that women need to be especially more qualified than men. I've been initiating disciples for 12 years, and I've learned what Prabhupada said, that guru means postal peon. Postal peon means I'm just delivering the message. I'm not adding, I'm not taking anything out of it. I'm just giving it selflessly to devotees. That's the only qualification, that you know it and that you're selfless in your efforts to share it.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Prabhu, but don't you think we could admit that one of the diseases of the Western mind is to think that everyone should be entitled to do everything, and that if you can do something, you should be doing something? But in actuality, we see that in Vaishnava culture, women are giving the benefit, they're giving the opportunity to always have the humble position, and that is actually beneficial, always being in the background, always serving, not getting credit, not being seen. That is actually being beneficial, because what we all are striving for as devotees is humility. So you starting this petition for Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus, isn't that, if we're really honest, isn't that just a result of your Western conditioning and you being in the United States? And it's not actually admitting the role that Vaishnava culture and Srila Prabhupada envisioned for women. Just be at the background and advance, but don't be seen, don't be heard. Be the servant of the servant, be as humble as a blade of grass, which is actually a wonderful opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, all of us have that same opportunity, Shardiya, to become humble in Krishna's service. And humility means wanting to help others advance, even at the expense of one's own prestige or recognition. Isn't it? I mean, Srila Prabhupada, for example, made Krishna famous all over the world. I remember from the 60s and 70s, there were many famous gurus, and their movements were all identified with them. There was the Maharishi movement and the Guru Maharaji movement and this one and that one. And it was the leader was all about the leader. But ISKCON was different. It was all about Krishna, all about chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, and Prabhupada was obscure. And he made Hare Krishna a household word all over the world, but he was not widely known, you see. So the point is, to be a Vaishnava and to share Krishna consciousness is in and of itself a most humble activity. So as far as imposing social roles on women, we need to understand that these roles are superfluous. They are secondary in relation to Vaishnavism. If one is a Vaishnav, if one is a devotee of Krishna, one has already surpassed all the varnas and all the ashrams, all the social constraints that are there to help non-Vaishnavas gradually progress to being Vaishnavas. Those are done. They are behind. Prabhupada writes this in the 3rd canto in relation to the 4 Kumaras. You don't need to practice Varnashram if you've come to the point of Vaishnavism. So he was proud that these women had come to him and come to the point of Vaishnavism. He said they're as good as their brothers. In the matter of preaching Krishna consciousness, there is no differentiation. There is no restriction. So everybody should be humble. We're saying only the women should be humble. only the women should take this subordinate role. All jivas are female in relation to Krishna. So is it just the women who get this opportunity to have a humble social role and the men can be arrogant? This really rankles me when I hear we want to establish Varnashram in the name of Prabhupada. This is 50% of Prabhupada's mission. We want to establish Varnashram. So Varnashram was rejected by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his conversation with Ramananda Roy as subordinate, as inferior. It's meant for the non-devotees. But if you try to impose the Varnashram on Vaishnavas, then we make an aparad. Vaishnava can act in any one of the Varnas and any one of the ashrams. So is it arrogant for women to want to be gurus? Again, this is why my heart goes out to the women in our movement, because they're in this catch-22 position. You're supposed to be chaste. You're supposed to be humble. But then you're supposed to preach Krishna consciousness. So if you preach, well, you're not being humble. The women who have survived all of this psychological pressure are, to me, far more advanced than many of the men in our Sangha, just because they have endured this humiliation and this marginalization year after year out of their sincerity to serve Prabhupada.
Thank you for explaining that, Prabhu, but could you still clarify and prove to us that your reasons for starting the petition against the GBC, which we could say is an act of defiance, your reason to start this petition that Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus should be allowed is not motivated by a feminist agenda? Can you clarify and prove?
Well, I wonder if you have read the petition. People who have that mood that it's an act of defiance have not read the petition. What the petition says is that we support the GBC's modality of cultural sensitivity, allowing various parts of the world to adjust their preaching and their spiritual leadership strategies to the time, place, and circumstance. That is what the petition says. What happened was the GBC came out with that stand, and then they backed off under pressure from leaders in the Indian ISKCON Yatra. So the petition is saying, no, stick with what you've already decided. We support that. That's the right idea. Let's go forward with that. And we've had, just so you know, we've had almost 3,000, going on 3,000 responses from almost 70 countries. This is not just America. This is all over the world. And those who oppose Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus may poo-poo a petition like that, but they cannot do it. I bet they can't get 10% of that response outside of India. And even within India, most devotees don't think this is a big deal. It's just some of the leaders have somehow got it stuck in their mind that we have to protect Vedic culture. And look, I respect these devotees. They've done great things. But if they think that this works in America, they are just in la-la land. They have no idea how much damage they're doing to Prabhupada's mission in the West by being so stuck on this point, so obsessed with stopping women from initiating.
Prabhu, let's play devil's advocate. We know that GBC really tried. It went to the Shastric Council twice, and then the same decision to allow Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus was upheld. But then the GBC decided to give in to, I think, your point about cultural sensitivities, but then decided to give in, almost make a bit of a U-turn and say, okay, now let's just take a pause on Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus. And it was, we all know that it was, you just mentioned, because of the pressure from the Indian leaders in Indian Yatra. So why do you think people in India or certain groups within ISKCON in India have this mood of, let's just, we just need to, why do you think the GBC went ahead with this U-turn essentially?
Yes, and it was a U-turn. The reason is that the ISKCON Continental Committee in India wrote to the GBC and said, we will no longer cooperate with the GBC if you allow women to initiate. We want a 3-year moratorium. And they said that we have so much of the property in ISKCON and we're not being heard, even though they've had 20 years to present their arguments. So the GBC's waffling on this was very unfortunate, in my opinion, and very disrespectful to those of us who are preaching outside of India, who need this sort of cultural sensitivity applied in our circumstances. It was nothing but political pressure. And that's why one of the reasons why the petition went out. The ladies, my god sisters who have aspiring disciples, are many of them in their 70s, and they're supposed to wait 3 more years. Are they going to live 3 more years? One of them said to an aspiring disciple, look, we've got this delay again from the GBC. How about if you take initiation from a male guru, but I'll be your primary Shiksha guru? And this lady responded, no, I'll just wait for my next lifetime. So is this actually serving Prabhupada, that educated, qualified people are approaching ISKCON and being told, no, you cannot take initiation just yet. Give us another 3 years to think about it. So this moratorium is only for women. Another example of gender bias in the leadership. It's only applied to women. Now they say we want to study Guru Tattva before we allow women to initiate. All right, fine. Guru Tattva can definitely use some work in ISKCON. So put a moratorium on the men also. There's a moratorium on all initiations while we review our system, and then let's go forward. But no, only the women are being disallowed.
And I think probably one thing that's worth pointing, you said, point about have people actually read that petition? And I read in that, petition that you've been organizing, it specifically says, we are, you're not saying that nobody has to be insensitive to cultural sensitivities in India. So it's just about allowing the people in the West to carry on. So as much as we in the West, I call us as we because I am in the West, we are sensitive to those cultural sensitivities in India. Surely it is fair for them
Yes.
to be sensitive to cultural sensitivities of the West, or is it too much? Are we just asking too much Western woke,
Right. It's
agendas?
no, you're exactly right. That the devotees in India have found success, tremendous success, spreading Krishna consciousness by appealing to the conservative side. That in the face of westernization of Indian culture, those who want to hold on to the culture gravitate to ISKCON. I completely get it. I understand that works in that part of the world. Then that's fine. That's fine. That's great. But then to say, so we have to do it like that all over the world is an offense to Srila Prabhupada. It's an offense to Prabhupada because he did not do things that way. He made adjustments in the West for the Westerners. So are we saying that Prabhupada was wrong, that he was compromising, that he was going against the Vedic standards? It's offensive to Prabhupada to insist that his approach in the West now can be abandoned. So I would say, who is capitulating to cultural norms, right? They accuse us in the West of capitulating to feminism, which is complete nonsense. And in fact, they're capitulating to some notion, some idealized notion of cultural norms that is so foreign in this part of the world that it will drive people away from our movement and disempower our preachers all over the West.
And I think another thing worth mentioning is, where that idea of women should be playing that backward role, like behind the scenes role as mothers and caregivers and, subordinate wives serving husbands come from. Because in India, we all know in Indian culture, women are actually given a very good position in society as mothers. They're revered as, mothers. And, we often refer, to female devotees as Mataji or Mata or mother. So that idea of being a mother is never being disvalued or dishonored in India. So maybe they're thinking, the idea or the notion of gurus, this revered position, is somewhat in conflict of this, position as the woman's primary role as a mother. So can women be simultaneously treated or worshipped or revered as mothers and gurus at the same time? Maybe that's where the conflict is coming from,
Yes, of course. The role of women as guru begins with childbirth. Everybody has a woman for a guru in the form of their mother, who teach them so many things. This again gets back to this inflated idea of what a Diksha guru is. It's very distorted. It's very much in conflict with Prabhupada's descriptions. Prabhupada's vision was that all of his disciples would have a few disciples, right? That's what the vision that he expressed in Mayapur in 1975 that put him in ecstasy. He wanted everyone to have a few disciples. So it bewilders me why some of my dear God brothers in India feel like the sky is going to fall in if a few grandmothers have a few students. This idea that a guru has to be an international celebrity that is revered with a high seat and all kinds of accolades is that has been disavowed by the GBC years ago during the Zonal Acharya reformations. The guru is meant to be just a message carrier who is helping and assisting and nurturing a few disciples. And if they have the charisma and the capacity to take care of more, that's fine. And if people want a guru based on reputation rather than their accessibility, that's fine. Both options work according to, it is the disciple who should be making the decision, right? Not the GBC. And the GBC has a right to say you have to meet minimal criteria. They've done that. But then to say, well, you meet the criteria, but you can't because you're a woman, this is very difficult for educated people to accept in this part of the world.
I know probably briefly covered this point about, so again, another conflict alongside the notion that, women as mothers and gurus doesn't quite add up is that, can women be gurus under the Varnashram system? Because Varnashram system, although you mentioned that, Lord Chaitanya did say, it's not something that we should be upholding because Vaishnavas are above the Varnashram system, but we've time and time again come across people trying to uphold this Varnashram system and the Vedic society. But is there anything in the Varnashram system that stipulates women under the Varnashram system cannot be gurus? Is that where this kind of thing is coming from? This notion of female gurus is non-Vedic, it's not in the Varnashram system, therefore we should not be doing it.
Yes, that is exactly where it's coming from. And we also, I showed you the quote earlier that Prabhupada made adjustments for the West. He said this is new in the Sankirtan movement for women not to have this role in the background. It's new, it's innovative, and it was working. And it still works. It still works. When gender equity is practiced in the West, people join. This is one of the reasons, Shardia, you mentioned I've been an outspoken advocate for this. I'm not a feminist. I'm a preacher. I'm trying to preach Krishna consciousness for 50 years in this field. And this is what you need. People will respond positively when we can show gender equity. And gender equity in this case means that at least a few women freely initiating those who want to be their disciples. So should we be setting that aside in favor of Varnashram? Well, Prabhupada said that preaching was 50% of the mission. The other 50%, this Varnashram, he was addressing to his preachers who were having a hard time staying in Krishna consciousness. He wanted to be sure there was a safety net. He had an army of brahmacharis in the mid-70s distributing books. They started having trouble, falling down. That was what motivated him to say this. I know this from Abhiram Prabhu, who was his nurse and the confidant at that time. He said Prabhupada could see that especially the brahmacharis, even sannyasis, were really not fit for a life of renunciation. He wanted to make sure that they could have a life in Krishna consciousness nonetheless. That was why he wanted to go to Gita Nagari, show how to live off the land, and establish the Varnashram as a safety net. But if you are able to follow the principles and able to chant 16 rounds and eager to preach Krishna consciousness, Varnashram is irrelevant. You have a mission to awaken spirit souls to Vaishnavism. And it doesn't matter what Varna or ashram you're in, or the people you're preaching to are in, or whether they accept it or not, you see? So if people want to establish Varnashram, why don't they start somewhere else? Why pick on the women, right? Women are supposed to be protected, but instead they're getting repressed. Repression is not the same as protection. Protection means you are enthused, you are enlivened, you feel secure, you feel motivated and happy, right? And to say, well, we're going to start implementing varnashram by putting the women in their place is, to me, a very unhealthy frame of mind, right? There's so many ways you can implement varnashram. I mean, we talked about the single mothers in America. Why don't we start with the Kali Yuga men, right? Why don't we train them up in how to be decent, responsible husbands and fathers and take care of families? Why don't we start with that movement? Why don't we present ISKCON as representative of family values as opposed to repression of women? Do you see how this message is so backwards and so obnoxious to people in this part of the world? Whereas it could be very positive if we put the emphasis in the right place. Another example is village life, agriculture. There's tremendous interest and appreciation for those who try to live off the land and grow their own food and get back to nature. Why don't we emphasize that in our varnashram efforts? Why don't we start with that? I can tell you one reason. My wife and I in our late 60s are trying to learn how to grow food with our family, our children, grandchildren. And it's hard work. It's hard work, and we weren't brought up this way, so we don't have experience, but we're trying to gain experience and share it with our children, and that way establish varnashram. Why start varnashram by putting women in their place? It's just so unfortunate, foolish, and offensive to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Prabhu. Can't we argue, though, that the whole goal of varnashram is to protect women? So if we're going to denounce varnashram, we're leaving women vulnerable, and women are key, because we know in Bhagavad Gita it is said that when women are degraded, the whole society degrades and falls apart. So women are absolutely key. So I think we understand we have to focus on the women. And if we are saying that varnashram is irrelevant, we are denying the fact that varnashram is Krishna's transcendental system, and we're putting it on an equal level with all other social systems and gender roles, which is a very distorted thinking, because we're very clear. Prabhupada wanted varnashram. Varnashram is the only system that Krishna approves of. And we also know that if we implement varnashram, it will be to the benefit of all. But, starting with the women, as is made clear by Bhagavad Gita, that is important.
Well, I did not mean to imply that varnashram is irrelevant. It's relevant for non-devotees, and it's relevant for devotees to understand its value. But to impose its strictures on devotees, that's irrelevant, because devotees are already beyond that level. This is my point, Shardiya, that the idea of guru being this superstar does not fit with a woman's position in varnashram. You're exactly right. But the idea of the Diksha Guru being the superstar is not the proper understanding of the Diksha Guru. It is a small scale operation for most people, and we need desperately. Right now we have dozens of gurus with thousands of disciples, and we need thousands of gurus with dozens of disciples. The GBC has made many efforts to get more people to accept the responsibility of initiating disciples, but then they're cutting out 50% of the audience, of the market, by saying, well, it's not proper for women to have this role. The role of guru is postal peon, just taking care of a few people. And grandmothers are eminently qualified to do that, having raised children and grandchildren. They're eminently qualified to take compassionate care, attentive care of aspiring Vaishnavas. So it's not, I don't mean to minimize the value of varnashram. All I'm saying is it needs to be applied intelligently.
Thank you for clarifying that, Prabhu. Still, we can argue that women are in a special category in themselves. We can say that Prabhupada might have wanted, men from various cultural, racial, social backgrounds to act as gurus, because he had men from various backgrounds, be leaders, be sannyasis, but he did not do so for women. So can't we say that women are a separate category, because we have something called street dharma? We don't have an emphasis on dharma for a certain race or there's not even like a phrase for the dharma of kshatriyas, etc. But Sri Dharma is there and it's emphasized, it's glorious. So doesn't that show women are in a unique category and therefore they uniquely can have different qualifications or exclusions from
Absolutely.
acting as Diksha Gurus?
Well, different dharma, absolutely, for men and women. No question about that. The question is, does that dharma overlap on the transcendental service of a Vaishnava Diksha Guru? You see, of giving Diksha, of giving shelter to others. And again, I made my point, I'm repeating myself here, but the position of an older woman giving shelter to others is very natural. It is not in conflict with Sri Dharma. There's many examples in our Gaudiya tradition. There's many examples historically. So there's no conflict. This has been proven again and again. So why there's so much obsession with stopping women somehow or other from doing this very natural Vaishnava service, it just mystifies me. You know, it is Sri Dharma is transcended by Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada proved that. Prabhupada demonstrated that. Prabhupada engaged his female disciples in obviously non-Sri Dharmic ways, okay? So Prabhupada showed the example, it worked, and if we abandon that now, we're really abandoning our founder Acharya.
Mm-hmm. But the same founder Acharya did also state that women can attain perfection by simply worshipping the husband, serving the husband. There is, passages in the Srimad Bhagavatam which says that worshipping the husband or seeing the husband as a worshipable deity is the perfection of life for women. We also know that there's examples in the Bhagavatam of women, they did not take initiation, they might not even have performed sadhana, they simply served the husbands and reached perfection. So isn't this then neglected? Isn't this overshadowed? Aren't we denying, the role that Krishna and ultimately Prabhupada desires for women to take, and then for women to find fulfillment, in that role?
Most women will find fulfillment in that role, if provided that their husbands are dharmic also. And if the husband is not dharmic, and the husband does not fulfill his responsibility, then what is the position of the woman? So she's supposed to follow regardless. This is why Krishna consciousness is transcendental. This is why Prabhupada initiated women independently of their husbands, whether they were married or not. He gave them shelter in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. He did not see them on the bodily platform. He saw them as sincere spirit souls wanting to serve Krishna, and he gave them all opportunity to do so. So Prabhupada did not recoil from Vedic Dharma, from Varnashram Dharma, from Sri Dharma. He encouraged his disciples like that. But more than that, he encouraged them to preach according to their circumstances. So again, the women and those in Prabhupada's circle at that time were all young women. They were all either with children or preparing for children in most cases. The circumstances are very different now. You have these grandmothers, and they're very competent and very learned and very sincere, and Prabhupada would be very proud of them, and I feel Prabhupada would be very upset to see them being repressed. My godbrother Trivikram Maharaj was recounting this incident in 1976, where the GBC passed a series of very repressive resolutions about women. These were the days when there was an army of brahmacharis selling books, and Prabhupada was encouraging them to stay in their renounced position. And so some of the leaders said, well, the women should go somewhere else. And the GBC passed such a resolution. When Prabhupada saw it, Trivikram Maharaj said he started crying. He was so upset that this kind of chauvinistic mood would come from the leadership of the movement on his sincere female followers. So he vetoed all of those resolutions that were so repressive to women. See, but now we're drifting back into that same mindset. We have to fight, and cultural sensitivity is a way forward, allowing various parts of the world to make their own decisions.
Mhm. Thank you, Prabhu. And we can see that Prabhupada, as we've said before, he accepted people from various cultural backgrounds, various levels. We also can say that many of the people that came to Srila Prabhupada initially weren't following, any like social standards, social norms, social rules. And isn't it true that Prabhupada, therefore, initially was very accommodating, very lenient, allowed women, to basically continue to exist as they did before, but ultimately, he wanted everyone to, as they progressed, become more Vedic and follow one ashram to a greater and greater extent. Wasn't that his module? Can't we say that ISKCON as a society needs to progress and transform into a Vedic society?
Yes, one of my godbrothers who opposes Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus made the same point. He said that we need to boil the milk. We need to raise the devotees to a higher Vedic standard. So another godbrother, Radhanath Maharaj, was saying, so far as North America is concerned, well, is there any milk to boil? We become so Vedic that we only can appeal to those who are blessed to be born with knowledge of Sanatana Dharma and their heritage from the Indian community, and we are irrelevant to everybody else. There's no milk to boil as far as bringing people up to a higher Vedic standard if we cannot reach educated, thoughtful, leader potential people in this part of the world. So to do that, we require to show that, yes, we are friendly to everybody and we practice what we preach. You're not this body, doesn't matter what your birth is, you can be Krishna conscious.
Thank you, Prabhu. One of the points that I just quickly, very briefly wanted to pick up on is, obviously, you started the petition. People might argue you feel very passionately about the issue. So, what do you see as the impact of not allowing Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, not just for the US, because people could say, you're just talking about the West, you're not cognizant of the wider needs, because ISKCON is a family, right? It's a worldwide movement. So, what do you think is the impact of not allowing Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus for ISKCON as a movement?
It will make us, it will deprive us of educated people from parts of the world other than India. It will deprive us of appealing to intellectuals. It will deprive us of the chance to engage people in Lord Chaitanya's movement who have leadership skills and potential to reach many others. Such people in outside of the Indian continent or diaspora, they cannot relate to the idea of women in this restricted social role. I'll give you an example, and again, I can only speak from my perspective, but the very conservative Baptist church or some other churches in the United States advocate a limited social role for women, and they're not allowed to take leadership roles within the congregation. Those religious movements or organizations have been very prominent in America for decades, centuries, but they are hemorrhaging members these days. They are shrinking and they are dividing, and they are not at all in a growth position. That idea that we're going to appeal to conservatives in the West by having a conservative social approach in ISKCON is advocated only by people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. We will be deprived of the quality of leadership that Prabhupada envisioned ISKCON acquiring from this part of the world.
No, thank you, Prabhu. And also, there is, we need to be very conscious. This issue is something that's really highlighted cultural sensitivities across the whole spectrum of devotees from across the world, really. So there seem to be this gulf of difference, clearly, evidently, when it comes to the attitude towards Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus. So I think one thing we cannot neglect is how we respect those cultural sensitivities, and also encourage unity and sort of coordination. There's no harm, no, nobody's going to get anything by standing on two opposite corners, arguing at each other. So how do we move across these barriers and the gulf between the different fractions? One could argue even from the time of creation, the Kumaras didn't want to follow Brahma's instruction, did they? So from the time of creation, there has been disagreements and different perspectives. So how can we put those different perspectives together, aside, and come together as a family to address this cultural sensitivities, and move forward, really?
Yeah, that's such a very, very important question, because Srila Prabhupada said that we can succeed as a movement if we stick together. And I really feel the GBC has it right, as do our thousands of signatories on the petition. The GBC has it right with cultural sensitivity. As the movement grows, there are naturally going to be diverse approaches and strategies according to time, place, and circumstance. So Srila Prabhupada said that if we focus on the diversities, that is material. So try to focus, he said, on the unity. The principle of unity means that we are all brothers and sisters in Krishna's service, in serving Prabhupada, and we, therefore, as family members, we accept one another, we tolerate one another, we support one another, we applaud one another, we encourage one another. So it's very discouraging when one part of the world throws their weight around and says, you have to do it our way. It's like a spoiled sibling in the family, as opposed to pulling together and saying, let's work, let's all be on the same team. What we're hearing is, you're not important, you don't know what you're doing, you are violating Vedic principles, and this is very discouraging. So the GBC, in their wisdom, by a very strong majority, said we should make this a culturally sensitive issue. That allows for unity and diversity. Anything else means a split in our unity. And this would be so displeasing to Srila Prabhupada. So the only way we can avoid splitting is to appreciate one another, tolerate one another, and accept one another, and give each other respect. Amanina manadena, right? Not demanding respect. No, we have to do it our way because we're powerful. No, that's not amanina manadena. That is just the opposite. To respect one another means that we give each other the benefit of a doubt that we can do things intelligently, don't you think? So this is what we're seeking. Yeah. If I may, I'll just share with you this website that we're developing. A group of us who are experienced preachers and senior devotees here in the West are trying to show how we can maintain this unity and diversity. Again, if we're bunched up, we can never be broken. But when we're divided, then we can be broken very easily. So we have established this website, Unity and Diversity, ISKCON.org. And on this website, you'll find many discussions on the subject of not only Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus, but how to work in a cooperative way with varying strategies for preaching in different parts of the world.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think that was really, really helpful. And the point about respect, and I recall very clearly one of the things that my Gurudev said as well when we had a disciples meeting, that nothing displeased Prabhupada more than when his disciples were fighting with each other or disagreeing, be making it very ugly. We can all disagree, agree not to, agree to disagree, but doing it in that respectful manner is the sensible and mature way to do. And thank you so much for sharing that link. We will put that link across so listeners that are our viewers at home can actually follow that, and hopefully it'll help us form some sort of unity, even if it's to agree to disagree, but to do it in a respectful way that doesn't disrespect ISKCON and Srila Prabhupada. Sharadia, you had a few comments, and I think we will probably then draw it to a close.
Yes, I just wanted to thank Kalakantha Prabhu for giving us his valuable time and sharing his experience, his knowledge, and his insights with us. As we mentioned, we have already left the link to the Unity and Diversity YouTube channel, and you can find more discussions with Kalakantha Prabhu and other senior devotees on the topic of Vaishnavi Diksa Gurus, but also on other topics which are potentially divisive, but which, if we manage it properly, can still be points of unity. If we keep Srila Prabhupada, I think, at the center, and also honor Srila Prabhupada as the highest authority. So thank you very much. We just also want to acknowledge there were a lot of comments and there were a lot of questions coming up from our viewers. We appreciate everyone's enthusiastic involvement. Unfortunately, we do have a limit on time, so it's not feasible for us to respond to all of those now. But please do feel free to leave comments, leave more questions, and we can see if our speaker has time to respond to some of the most prominent questions. So thank you so much, devotees, for joining us today. We do hope that it was an informative and an enlightening discussion. And please do let us know if you would like us to continue the discussion. We would be very honored to have Kalakantha Prabhu back again. And of course, also invite other seniors to discuss this topic further. Prabhu, do you have any closing words? I was wondering if you could potentially comment on Prabhupada's comment that the ISKCON movement cannot be destroyed by any external force. It can only be destroyed from within. So could you maybe, for closing, just comment on how that very profound statement Prabhupada made is relevant to this whole discussion?
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I enjoyed your conversation tremendously, and the questions and responses from your listeners as well. This inability to work together is the single thing that can cause us to fail in carrying on Srila Prabhupada's movement. And this would be a tremendous discredit for our generation and going forward. So my hope is that those who are hearing this podcast will consider these points, that we can work together without insisting that everybody do things exactly the same way. That's unity and diversity. That will prevent us from getting in conflicts that threaten to tear apart the fabric of our Sangha. We would be so pleasing to Srila Prabhupada if we can just work together, join hands, spread Krishna consciousness to everyone in every town and village all over the world. That will make our lives successful. My generation is aging out rapidly. So to end our tenure with a harmonious, tolerant, and inclusive mood would be, I can't imagine a higher offering we could make to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think that was a very apt way to conclude our discussion, emphasizing that an offering we can make to Srila Prabhupada is, I think, continuing his legacy of, as an astrologer predicted, creating a house which in the whole world can live. So I think that would be a beautiful offering we can all contribute towards making. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dee, for co-hosting. Thank you so much for all our viewers, and thank you so much for joining us, Kalakantha Prabhu. We're looking forward to being with everyone again in the near future. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.